Hey everyone, welcome to episode 4. In the previous episodes, we discussed the drivers and also the challenges that organisations can face when starting their modernisation strategy. And then last time, we talked about how to align the organisation, including the people and the processes, to get buy-in for your modernisation strategy. So today, and in this episode, we're going to build on these discussions further, and we're going to talk about how to organise your software modernisation effort. For example, how to get it started and to align the teams, etc. So let's get started. And how do you approach these factors?
Yeah, so I think it's important to, when you're approaching this process, to understand that you're working at different layers, and therefore, you're working at the organization, you're working at the technical level, etc. And all of these things require a different treatment or a different, structure or management, so to speak. And you have and to some extent they don't work individually. It's not like you can launch a modernization strategy just for the technical part and not touch on, as we've already discussed, all of these things are sort of interlinked. So we already talked about let's say sense of urgency or the reasoning behind this, things like building a business case and understanding where are the wins for or the why some of these things and how it benefits the organization in general and different departments. We already talked about the vision and creating alignment both at the technical level but also at the business level, how that information works. Now, when you're thinking about structuring this, so one thing is the technical aspect, another thing is like, let's call it the transformational aspect for the organization, right? And there you find yourself having different groups of people that need to get involved in different parts of that process, right? So most likely you'll have a group of people there what we would call sponsors for what you want to do. These are the people who are believers on this change, and they're sort of like triggering inside the organization this kind of stuff. And you're going to have people that they are going to be leading that change internally, right? Which is another, let's say, need that you're going to have. And then you're going to have leaders who are going to, you're going to have people who are going to be, let's say, taking ownership of individual kind of changes or projects, if so to speak, right? And all of those require different levels of involvement and require different levels of skills, right? So when you're talking about the people leading the change, those may not be the same sponsors. Those actually may be a very different combination where you have people who have authority, to actually affect some of the changes. You may have people with leadership skills. You may have people with more of knowledge about the domain or a specific area or set of skills required to do some of these things. People with, let's call it, influence ability, which is very different. No, you can have authority, but influence can come from other places, right? Like the typical example would be, who's the person that you would search for in order to get the information you need, or understand where in the organization you need to, So all of those things are part of that team that is sort of supporting and leading that change. And then you have people who are going to be taking, the pieces, of that process or that, the increments on how you're going to be building this thing, and those may require other set of skills that are not completely the same, right? So having this balance in the leadership team that drives this change is quite important, right? I would say that's one of the first things to look at. I don't know, maybe Sandro can also, and Mash can also add a little bit.
There is, yes, there is a potentially a slightly different way, which is complementary to what you said, but to look at it. So I was thinking, as you were speaking, I was thinking about the boundaries of your modernization effort. This is a slightly different perspective on the same subject. So organizations are different. So they have, like, we've been working with extremely large organizations with thousands of employees, all the way to very small organizations and all of them need modernization. But then, for example, what we can talk about is, what are the boundaries of that modernization? The boundaries can be, the biggest boundary would be across the entire organization, all the way to just one system that they have, or one part of a system that they have, right? So those are the different boundaries, or maybe, like, this is probably what you refer to as layers of abstraction, Jose, we were talking about. And I believe that as you widen the boundaries, or the wider the boundary, the more you will face the problems that you were describing. You will be talking to multiple stakeholders, multiple departments, you have more people to have buy-in or to collaborate and stuff. So one of the first things for me to decide is, what's the boundary? Right, and within that boundary, then you will face all those different challenges at different levels. Right, so that's, yeah.
I'll add another perspective to that, actually, and that is of organization, right? So one is having the right people, but how are the teams organized in terms of the different type of activities that are happening, right? So there are quite a lot of different sets. You've got business as usual. Then you've got this leadership element that you were talking about. Then you've got the execution of remedial work, or, refactoring, or kind of breaking the monolith, or all that kind of stuff. Then you also have innovation, right? And then you have platform, right? Maybe that is so the reason I'm saying this is that different parts of this work actually requires different kind of teams and different kind of interactions between the teams. So Team Topology's book comes to mind, where you've got platform team, you've got enabling teams, and you've got feature teams and those kind of things. If I've got the right term there, but you have to kind of start thinking about not only the how we lead and how we execute, and also the boundaries, but also how we will organize ourselves to be able to do this work, right? Is the initial piece of work related to innovation? Is it related to platform? Is it related to breaking the monolith in a particular area, or any other activity that you need to do on the modernization front? So where do you start? Where do you actually, what's the first team? Is it like, just taking some representatives and creating the leadership team? Or is it actually creating a platform team and creating a reference architecture or reference platform for others to start using, that kind of thing?
I like some of the things that are coming up. I think Jose started with the great articulation. It's that balance of vision and skills, having the right people in the team. And it's like any good cross-functional team in any aspect of software delivery, you need the right people with the right skill set to deliver on the job at hand. And I think what's been really insightful for me is the fact that you know how to build that team out in terms of the skill sets you require. When we build on the last episode, we talked about the roadmap and the priorities and how you know where you're going to kind of start your effort. And then once you have that detail, you set the boundaries for how you're going to approach it. And based on where that boundary sits within the organization or a particular department, you can build your team out. And once you know your team for delivery, then you get all the good part that we were just starting to build on with the comms and the comms channels. I mean, we've said it can be vast, the amount of stakeholders that are going to be involved and want to be informed about kind of the progress. So yeah, I found that really, really helpful. Thank you. Yeah.
Quite often the questions that we get are people ask, like, but how do we organize ourselves? How do we organize our teams or our stakeholders. Um, and as we were discussing before, like there are many different ways of organizing, and you need to choose one that is suitable for the context. But for example, at the organizational level, one that I could share that is working well in one of our largest clients, we call it a continuous improvement program. So basically the way it works is we have a group of senior stakeholders in the company. They are all vice presidents in this. It's a very large organization. So basically, any organization that relies on software, they want to have a modernization, as we discussed in, I think, in the first episode, is not a one-off thing. You want to keep modernizing your systems as we go along. So in order to structure that, to organize that, we create what we call a continuous improvement program, or a CIP for short, as we say in that project. So there is a steering group, and the steering group is composed by all those senior stakeholders. And there are multiple sources of initiatives, of improvement initiatives. And those different sources of initiatives can be functional areas of the business, can be more technical areas or cross-functional areas of the business. So the people leading those different areas of the business might go to the CIP steering group and say, hey, my area, we would like to improve these kind of things in our area. And there is a funnel that all of those different improvement ideas go through, and the steering group applies a criteria into how they would elect those initiatives to work on. And then through that criteria, they form a backlog of initiatives, of improvement initiatives across the company. And remember that we are talking about strategic initiatives. You're not talking about someone wants to do a small refactoring or add more unit tests for their code. Those are local things, right? We're talking about bigger initiatives. So then they create a backlog for improvements. And this backlog is almost like a portfolio level, but just for improvements. And then there are teams that are dedicated to the CIP, so the continuous improvement program. Some teams, like in this organization, they have teams that are dedicated for improvements. That's their job, is to take those large modernization improvements, and they will work on that for quite a few months in certain streams. And there are other teams that given the initiative that they want to do, they need to form a new team specifically for that initiative, because that goes back to what Jose was discussing before. It's not because you just have an improvement initiative that you have the right skills to do that. So some of those teams, they are assembled for that specific initiative. Other teams, they are there and they have the skills necessary for certain types of initiatives. And other initiatives, they need to combine with external people that will be brought in to help them to tackle certain initiatives for a period of time. So that's, but the steering group, the CIP steering group, they control, they refine, they validate which initiatives should be done. And they also are senior enough to prioritize them and then feed into the CIP teams. So that is a example of organization at a very, very high level that we are doing with one of our clients.
It actually, another example is when we do our modernization discovery workshops, which kind of in some ways, because this is a very large client indeed. So, you know, almost, we talked earlier as well, making change or modernization part of your organization, right? And it's not an initiative that you run once in a while, but it's something that's happening all the time. And this is a terrific example of that, I think. The modernization discovery workshops we do is we kind of take a similar approach, and we speak to all the different teams and departments and stakeholders and start understanding the problems, the pain points that they have, and start pulling out these ideas and agreeing these ideas for initiatives, as Sandro, you talked about. We do it as a kind of a one-off thing just to get clients started. And then what we do is work with them to create a technical vision and a technical strategy, and kind of feed all these things into a coherent strategy of modernization, and create a roadmap and a plan with them. And then again, in this case, get all the stakeholders in the room and start prioritizing that, and create the next steps, as it were, and how to take that forward. The good thing about that is that this is something that we do in the beginning, but it's something that can be carried on. It's like, can be the starter for a continuous improvement program, where you are constantly coming back, reprioritizing, taking those same stakeholders, creating that committee, bringing initiatives in. As you do more work, you're bringing, kind of getting feedback and bringing more initiatives, more problems in, and constantly evolving your roadmap.
Both of those examples, they talk towards something that we've mentioned in previous episodes. One is, the quick wins and creating momentum for what you want, because depending on where your organization is, or depending on where your technology is, the gap may be quite big, and you may not end up getting there in a year, or so splitting that into things that are already provide value to the business, right, and are already moving you in the direction that you want to go is key, right? Because you can build on top of that success, and on top of that, and you can learn also of what is needed. What is it that the organization or the department or the teams need to build up in order to make that effective? So that is one aspect of that. The other thing that it talks to is about, if you really want to make modernization part of your organization or your department, you need to evolve the systems in your organization to incorporate that. Another system, for instance, is procurement, right? Like if we're working with partners, and we want to go for certain direction, like cloud, etc., it's also important, or agile, this kind of thing. It's also important to get partners that can work in that way, right, and allow you to have that capacity, build those skills, etc., and help you on that journey. So it goes beyond the technical aspect or just the change management aspect. As soon as you want to make that stick into your organization and culture of how you're doing things, you need to look outside of those ones. And this is why it's so important to always link it to the strategy for the organization, because it is not a local improvement. It's something that the benefits should be realized across the organization if you really want it to stick, and not to be a one-off kind of engagement or process.
That's great. It's all really insightful. And I think a lot of the conversation has been looking at things from that strategic point of view, maybe, large corporates. Something I'm really keen to understand is how do we support people that might be in delivery teams, maybe in smaller organizations or smaller delivery teams, but they themselves want to start a software modernization initiative. So a bit more bottom up from top down, if we look at the organization like that. What advice would you give there?
I think that there are different areas here. There is the small department, or like one team, two teams area, and they know that they need to modernize. Quite often what comes up is like, do we mix the technical improvements with the features that we need to build, or the business as usual, the things that we need to do? Do we unify that backlog? So a very common approach is say like, oh, let's unify the backlog of technical improvements and normal feature work together. This is one approach. But there are multiple ways of doing things that we've seen over time, and they have an impact in how quickly things happen. So, for example, one extreme is, if you want to have to modernize certain areas, you can have a dedicated team. So this is one approach for team structure. You have a dedicated team that you just focus on modernization work. While the existing team or other teams, they will keep doing business as usual. This has all of those things have pros and cons, right? So I'm not saying that one is better than the other. I'm saying that they have pros and cons. A good advantage of this approach is that you can have highly specialized people to focus on the areas that needs to be modernized, and that will happen faster, right? So then it's dedicated, they are not distracted, they are just going to go there and do what they need to do and prepare the system so that the other teams then can build on top later on. So the modernization effort will be faster and done normally by people that have the right expertise. There are some cultural impacts sometimes. Some people that are not part of that effort might feel left off. They might say, wow, I would love to be doing that work and I need to do business as usual. So that creates an issue in there. And there's also coordination as well, because depending on what you are modernizing, it will impact in the business as usual work as well. So then you need to have some sort of agreement in there. But there are many other ones. As I said, you can unify the backlog and then the same team does that. But then another question is, how do you prioritize? Do you prioritize by value that backlog? So then you need to be very clear on the more technical tasks. What is the value that you are adding? Another teams, for example, they've done 20% improvements, where Mesh and I were before Codurance. We had that. Our teams had 20% that for improvements. Again, this is good. It helps with innovation and stuff, but it's a bit less focus. For example, it's good for smaller innovations, keeps people excited, gives them that time. So you're always innovating, but it's a much slower process. So there are time box activities. So there are many different configurations that you can have, but they all will have pros and cons, and they will impact in how fast or slow things get done.
Taking it one level even lower, I would say that if you are within a team and business as usual is happening, and maybe you get a bit of time to do the improvements, and you start thinking about, well, how do I start improving? Because at the end of the day, the way we describe modernization or software modernization is make change easier and faster, right? So a lot of the times there are a lot of low-hanging fruit that you can start working on, even to start paving the way towards a bigger and more strategic modernization effort. And often I see, and I think maybe this is, it's a case of, you get this kind of tunnel vision, or if you've been in a problem for long enough, you don't think that's a problem. But often I see is the kind of the feedback cycles that are within, so develop, debug, deploy cycle. And there is so much room for improvement there, but either from a cultural point of view or skills, or we are too busy doing this, that people don't actually make those changes. The amount of time you see someone making a change, and for that to, even for the test to run completely, could take days. That unfortunately is actually quite a frequent occurrence in our industry. So if you're looking from a very, very tactical point of view, start looking at your own, at the very lowest level, the develop, debug, deploy cycle. At a higher level, we call it the value stream, that takes in a much wider picture, and start reducing that lead time, right? So how can you make these cycles quicker? What are the things that actually you can maybe automate, or you can work closely with other teams, like, for example, testing and so on? And how do you start reducing that? That already starts creating space for you to start making bigger changes. And I think at a very tactical level, if you can only do one thing, then do that.
What I would just say, like complementing what I said before, you just need to calibrate, for example, like the time, because a lot of people say, but what do I do with the time? So how many people work on that and stuff? And the things that Mash said, for example, improving the testing strategy or speed of the build and stuff like that. I sometimes have a preference to make that a very strong case for that, And either it becomes an epic on a backlog, but like something that someone or a team will take and we work on that as a task that provides value, instead of something that they do in their 20% of time. Because those 20% of time, they are great for keep people happy, small improvements here and there, but they are never strategic. And what you end up having is a lot of things that people started and didn't finish because they have, it's not an official thing that they are doing. I would rather say like, this is a strategic thing, it's part of our backlog. We're going to assign a certain number of sprints or people or teams to do that. Still treat that as strategic.
And it's very, very easy to assign value to that, right? Because what you're doing is you're saying the build deploy, debug deploy cycle or test deploy cycle takes X amount. We are running it X number of times or Y number of times. And if we shave off like 10 minutes of it, and the number of this is how much time we are saving. And if every person is running those, the amount of time that you can start saving really does start adding up, and you can present that to your sponsor and you can get their buy-in, and exactly you can actually do that as a well-planned piece of work.
I would also add that whatever it is that you're doing, you need to manage the risk, right? Like if you're going to be focused on refactoring, or you're going to be focusing on, adding tests, whatever it is that you're, locally able to do, you need to be very conscious of the impact that that's going to have in everything else, right? And this is why things like Agile, etc., are very interesting, because they allow you to make, to pay that sort of cost, in a way in which is manageable for the business as well. Otherwise, you're going to find resistance. You're going to find that there are blockers, right? So being very clear, not only about the value, but also how those things, how can you break those things down in order to minimize the risk, or at least be able to slowly pay it, is essential, and if you're going to be doing tests, do you need 100% coverage of tests versus a bit of that in order to be able to already start building that pipeline muscle, skill set, whatever it is that you're trying to do, versus getting the end product or the finished ideal vision, right? And that pragmatism, is something that you need to look for if you want to be successful with it at any level.
To give a few examples of things that we've done, for example, you talked about risks. You also talked about agile processes as well. So there are times where we know that we need to improve, but we don't understand. Like, it's difficult to know exactly what to do and the impact it's going to have. And we had that in quite a few projects ourselves, like where we say, look, we have this massive system, we need to improve that. We know what the problems are, but like, what are the risks? Which approach should we take to do that? And how can we iterate on that? So in cases like that, in one of our projects, one of our largest projects, we had a dedicated team to run an experiment. And that experiment, imagine like a spike, but at an architectural level, right? So, and that team worked. Their job was to take one area of the system and evolve that, or do a series of experiments to evolve that to a place where it could satisfy the problems that we were trying to resolve. And the outcome of that work, I think Amelia even mentioned that, is what we called a reference architecture. So the outcome after a few months was, this is the reference architecture that we want to have to move forward. And during that work, we were talking about the risks, not only the risks of the business, but the risks of migrating the system to that place, identifying the skills that we would need, what would be the easiest path to get there, and also how we would communicate that, how we would help the other teams to use that approach as well. So it was is a multifaceted experiment, where the outcome is not only the reference architecture, the static diagram, but it's also the process that needs to be used to go from where we are to that place. And we've done that in an area that was safe in the system. So this is one kind of approach. We also had a different, this one, it was not that it was easy, but it was easier because like we were still within the same system, we still within the same technology stack. But we had another project that they had this massive old PHP system, and they wanted to move to Java microservices. And this was extremely challenging because you cannot migrate bit by bit within the stack because you are changing the stack. So that was another, and also finding the right expertise within the people building the business as usual was difficult because, again, they were coming from a completely different stack and architecture. So also having a dedicated team with a few members from the existing system, we started building the new system in Java, migrating the features, and then finding a way to wire through the UI. But that's another example. So this kind of, when you are moving technology stack and stuff, again, this is something that having dedicated teams, a dedicated effort is far more suitable than just try to do that through a joint backlog or improvements and things like that.
That's a good point. And when you're talking about transferring skills, right? Because you, Sandro, you were mentioning, this focus group that creates experiments, etc. When you're doing that, you're not only understanding what the system needs, but also what kind of skills you need, right? And then how do you turn that into something that can be transferred to the rest of the organization? And this is where things like academy programs or technical coaching, etc., can really supercharge that process, right? Where instead of having people learn trial by fire, you can accelerate that learning and actually get results faster. Right. So that's another point that you need to look into. Like, how do you transfer that knowledge that is acquired through the experiments, not just the end result of the product or the technology that you've been building?
Yeah.
And this upskilling program can be grounded on the results of that experiment, right? Because now with that experiment,
Exactly.
Now you know where you were going, what kind of skills that you need, which technology and stuff. So then you can tailor that coaching or that support to help people to get to that place.
Yeah, to that technology. You mentioned PHP and Java, right? But it could be Vue and React or whatever it is that you're working with, right? Can be, made specific, no?
And having that reference architecture actually helps you to create the basis for that training. But even for people to start building features in that kind of mold and slowly picking up on the new stack, the new ways of doing things, can definitely help.
Yeah, it's like enablement through kind of cross-pollination of skills, ideas, and that kind of thing. It's it's definitely, we've all been there. It's definitely a nicer place to learn and develop rather than, as you said, something of fire, the steep learning curve that
trial by fire.
Trial by fire. Yeah, we've all been there. So definitely enablement is a much happier, safer place to be. Sounds good. Thank you all. That was really insightful. I like the way that we did the two different views and helping people from a more strategic point of view, and then also, from the ground up at that more tactical level. So really interesting different views there. So in the next episode 5, we're going to continue the conversation and we'll be talking about the technical strategies for making your software easier to change. Thank you all.
Thank you.